Hello, chess friends. This is International Master Valeri Lilov, and today I'd like to bring out some really instructive ideas on how, more importantly, in what way you can handle the opening structures that connect to the middle game, and how you can think about setting up the right plan towards almost any opening structure, despite you knowing or not knowing the actual theory. So let us go, first of all, by certain examples I'd like to show you. These are incredibly interesting games that I've come across, more like extraceptive games I've come across lately, about especially the early stage of the middle game. So we're starting with a game that was played by Peter Svidler versus Peter Lecko. As you can see, something that White has done in the opening that's always very important, very effective, impactful if you do, is we've gotten the center space and a great development as a follow up. It's just the d4 and e4 that White has already acquired are fantastic. It's the bishops, the queen, the black king that's a little bit exposed out there. So what do we do right now? This is really, really interesting. So I gotta say, speaking of this type of position, just as it is, it feels that White is having a little bit of a problem. I mean, Black is having a little bit of a problem. He's got this king that's terribly exposed. He's got those bad side pieces. But, okay, so our structure is better to begin with. In the open, you always care about that. Faster development, more activity, better control, things like that, which really make a great sense, when it comes to a position of this kind. But it's really very valuable that you get to think about what to do next. So how does pawn structure really affect the things that you want to do or achieve later on? Well, first thing that you'd like to do, which is very key, is number one, okay, think about what your pawns allow your pieces to do. Okay, so this is really, really valuable. How can you use the pieces in the maximum powerful way to attack or threaten your opponent based on what the pawn structure gives you? I want you to take a moment in this position and think about that as it comes to where or how White can advance or arrange his own pieces in development. Apparently, there's many moves that look good. We can play a move of f4, we can play a move like king b1, you can play a move like rook e1, rook f1 to open a file, you can even do f3 and h4. But we have to think in the long run, and this is the other thing that I'd like to mention. What you have to be considering is how do the pieces or the pawn moves that we've got affect the structure in the longer run, because you would that way get to commence to only those moves that do not present any risk, and secondly, you will know, more importantly, you will know which moves do pose a risk to the position and which ones do not. So h4 would be a good candidate, but it's a little committal and weakening. The g4 pawn will get a little bit weak. So we can think of a move like f4, and yet that will leave the e4 pawn as a little bit of a weakness. So that we don't want to do. We do not want to have a bit of a weakness or vulnerability in such a position. Okay? And the second thing that you would like to do is to think about how we can restrict. You see, there's always a way to restrict or improve towards the opponent. Instead of thinking necessarily about attacking moves, which is usually not the right time to do once we've completed the opening, I'd recommend, instead of looking at this, think about moves that can help you to restrict him or improve your pieces. So, this is a key idea. How can we do that right now? First and foremost, we need to begin with the strongest piece of our opponent. Then we find out that the black knight on e5 is just turned to be the most valuable piece, so white plays knight f3. It's an incredible move to begin with. Instead of an improvement, white starts with an idea to exchange black's most important horse in this position. So now black has to either exchange or push it up. Now you may actually wonder, but Valeri, isn't that move just giving black a stronger perspective towards playing knight c4? I think so. But in fact, what we have to do here, or what we can do, is just figure out a way to go forward. I mean, how do we do this? After the move of knight to the c4, we could find out that there is bishop to the d4. e5, and now the importance of playing the move of knight to d5. Knight x to the d, e x to the d. We're getting the chance to think about expanding. We've got the e pile that white's queen and bishop are already put in. And then we have the fact that the majority of black's own pieces feel a little bit off. White can make a move like b3. He can go for a move like bishop b2 or even knight d4. It is quite wonderful. One of the biggest things that you must do is to really start by asking that single question in time. How do I restrict over the opponent? How do I make that happen? And then in the end of the day, it's just that idea of forcing the black knight to go. I mean, if he really goes to exchange it, then we can have the recapture, and then it's beautiful. Knight takes f3 is what black has to do now, so that after bishop takes f3, he plays knight d7. And there's another question that we gotta ask: what next? What do we do? Well, what is key is that first and foremost, you must think about attacking. Not necessarily the committal moves that you're not so certain or you don't know so much about, but the ones that will pose him pressure. And key is that we play now with the move h4. Great looking move. Now if we do this, he's apparently going to have a huge problem out there, which is really why after knight f3 black decided to avoid the exchange. He wanted to move away so that at least the h4 doesn't come out now, but it still goes because it doesn't contain a risk. The biggest thing that I notice with most chess players is that they rarely ask themselves the question, how risky is this move going to be really? Is this move going to cause a risk, or is this move not? And the truth is, it doesn't cause any risks. We're getting the opportunity to attack against black right now, and we have that ability to threaten him. And, this is excellent. Very powerful out there, and very, very efficient. It's a good activity to think about, mostly because of the tactics. We got the threats, we have the attack out there, and we have everything coming versus the opponent. Strong. Remember, you must be considering different attacks or tactics. So at a move of h4, black plays knight takes the g4. There is h takes g5 that we're doing, creating a pretty significant problem versus the h6. And then we have not just the number of forces, a huge number of pieces that are being lined up and targeting the opponent's king, but we also have the fact that he doesn't have anywhere to go. It's a wonderful idea, really strong, really efficient, and it helps. Keep that in mind. You do not want to commit to any risks, but it doesn't mean that we actually can't play with moves of that kind. We're perfect here. So let's take a look. After it was played with the h takes to the g, okay, so this was move 14. As a matter of fact, black actually decided to do bishop d7. He realized that risk is coming, so he didn't want to sit there. He just wanted to escape and prepare for long side castles. So what do you do structurally here it is a good position, you have to admit. Things don't look so bad no more. So what's the right idea? What's the right strategy, so to speak, in a position of that kind? Well, I'd always argue that the best strategy in these kinds of positions is the possibility to think about keeping our pressure, keeping our position and our structure strong. We've got a wonderful looking pawn on the g5 now. We've got a great looking rook on the h1, and we've got black a little behind, having his pieces backsided. So what's the right way to go? Very, very good question. The first move that White really wanted to think about was to preserve. Yes, he simply really needed to preserve the pieces and make sure that everything is in place. How do we do that? Just bishop to d2. You know, what was really great about that single move is that, you know, everything is in place. Just it's the activity in here, and then we have the g5 that's quite wonderfully placed. It's all looking good. Remember, the most valuable thing is that you just want to preserve the qualities. Anything like a bishop pair, good pawn structure, and control, that keeps the position balanced. All you have to do is to figure a way to preserve it and keep it around so that, you know, things can work. It's really important. That is a great activity. We have the f, we have the g5, we have the rook that's actually quite strong and efficient, and we can really make it work. Let's take a look and see like what happens after bishop d2. Remember, the secret of great players like Carlsen, for example, is that they do not commit too early. Remember, that's the third thing. Do not commit to making moves that, or changes, or anything that could risk the stability or the structure that you have. This is very, very important. Don't do it too early. Okay? Give yourself a little bit of time and let the opponent do this first and weaken his position. So, this is quite important. Add more preparation. Add more development. This is easier to do. Don't rush for the middle game or the tactics to begin. Okay, so let's talk about that. And now in that position, apparently black had a bit of a challenge. So he played after bishop to the d2. Apparently he was having trouble. He played alongside castles to hide the king. And then white keeps improving. See, he follows that advice that I just mentioned. We just want to get ready. We need to be thinking about, you know, like important activity, good solid resources. And then with that in mind, we're apparently attacking against the g4. We have the, you know, our knight is playing from the center. Things are quite wonderful, I have to admit. As it goes, this is perfect. And, you know, remember that just you can continue with this, you can always consider that type of idea. Now we have the g4 that would be effectively, you know, pressured, and then the opponent is horribly bad out there. And so we have that f4, and it can be effectively, you know, placed. The rook can go to the h3, the pawn can go to f4, and then we can do a move like pawn to f5. So it's wonderful. Keep that in mind. The idea always turns out to be the build-up. We make the build-up, we make the control, you constantly pressurize the opponent, and okay, then after this we have the g6h, which can be fairly nicely done. So what happens in the game? This is very interesting. Well, as soon as we do the move of bishop to the d2 in this case, and then we have f3, we got the h6 in that moment, and so let me see. In fact, after bishop to the d2, surely black has a lot of trouble, a lot of things to be worried about. This is move 16. It's very interesting, very intriguing. He plays bishop g7, coming up with that idea. And so, what are we going to do now? What's the proper possibility to follow? Great question, as a matter of fact. Very, very good question. Take a moment, and what do we do next? So, I would like to mention to you that, you see, as it is, position is perfect. But then we have to decide if we're going to commit to the exchange or not. I mean, remember to think about the risk. Every move that does a trade or shifts the position contains an inner risk in itself. So think about that. Risky moves are to be made only if there is a good reason. The good news is that you got to think, does that move create a vulnerability in my position or not? So, if it doesn't, that's okay. So, we have queen takes g4, bishop takes d, because that move really doesn't create a vulnerability. F-pawn move can easily move ahead, so that it is not a problem. It does not create what I'd call structural weaknesses or vulnerabilities in your position. And that was a great idea. Okay, then what happened is the opponent has like a lot of issues out there, so he's not like doing all too well. What happened is that after queen takes g4, bishop takes d4, g takes h6, knight e5, and queen e2. See how subtle white plays it. All the achievement that he gets along the way is because of his patience. And I'm going to tell you now the best thing that most people tend to forget. A good pawn structure often allows you to do what we call as a piece coordination. Think about this. Piece coordination is the possibility to connect two or more pieces in order to get them together and make them twice as powerful as they would actually be before. So this is a beautiful thing to consider. So what should White do right now? I believe White must simply connect. This is a great variation. He has to connect the pieces, and he does it with the move of rook to h3. It's a simple move, but now this is, as a matter of fact, quite strong because of the possibility to play with the move of, you could be considering instantly about rook to the d3. We've gotten the chance to think about, rook d3, and then rook takes to the d6 maybe played. Again, a subtle move. We make a subtle move that does not cause any weaknesses or any vulnerability, and yet it is the kind of move that will help us to feel better, to really have what I'd call the most necessary development, support. The rook to the d3 is very strong and essential, and that's all we need. Remember, you've got to connect the pieces. It will not work if you don't connect them. Connect your pieces, make them work together, and stay close to one another. It's wonderful that way. Now the rooks are going to come down, like rook to the d3, and then there is so much more we can do. So after this rook h3, black plays knight takes to the d2 now, and then of course white does queen takes to the d2, bishop takes the bishop down to e5, f4. See, almost all the moves that white is able to do are necessarily a strong impact on the in the position. So in fact, after that type of move, we're ready to go. We have that ability to advance. You've got this strong activity, control. Things are just wonderful. Have the f4 too, and it's just it's a great type of move. You have nothing to worry about. Remember that. It's little by little, we're just coming forward, and then so let's see what happens right now. In that sequence, right after the move of f4, black obviously has to worry. He played bishop to the f6, And so what should white do next? Queen takes d6. It doesn't take any effort. Remember that type of thing. All you have to do is to give yourself the freedom and, this is quite critical. So that's very, very powerful. And then now after that type of a move, then you can follow up with now e5. White is already getting an extra pawn as something, and it's just wonderful. Simple, really good, and of course. What's coming up in this type of position? Well, after the move of queen takes to the d6, queen takes d6, rook takes to the d6, black plays rook h to e8 in order to come down. Rook dg8, actually. Rook dg8, hoping to get the rook on, but doesn't really matter because now, after rook dg8, white plays e5, rook takes g2, e takes f, and now you can see that there's a passed pawn. There's a great attack coming by almost every other piece, and there's nothing black can do because it's just white's already dominating, and black did it all on himself. It's amazing. So very important thing is for you to remember and try to follow these type of ideas every time when it comes to them, so that you keep those in mind, the 5 principles that are most valuable, most necessary for your attack.